Okay, you all good? Let's do it. Hello and welcome to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast. Today, myself and Simon are just going to have a quick conversation to try and answer a simple question about lead generation and to offer some ideas and tips you can hopefully implement in your own work. We hope you find it of value. Welcome back. I'm Daniel Hopewell here with Simon Delaney, and this is episode 26 of the B2C Lead Gen podcast, provocatively entitled The Truth About Data Sharing. And it's going to be interesting to see how this podcast does because it's a little bit different to the normal ones we do. But we're going to roll the dice and give it a go, do something different. And we're talking about this because it's actually quite a good time to talk about this kind of stuff because at the moment there's like the news about cookie blocking and Google's latest updates and what is essentially the demise of third-party data going forwards. And I mean, that's great to hear a lot of the time, and it's great for us, especially because we can present lead generation as a sort of antidote to this. But with that said, we always try to be very transparent on this show. It's transparency first, always. And I think it would be wrong of us to just say there's no problems in the lead gen world and just pretend that that's completely fine and there are no issues without exploring it. I think that would kind of undermine what we're trying to do. So with that in mind, Simon, I'm going to kind of bring you in here to sort of say, can you explain a little bit more about, I guess, what you call the dubious side of data sharing?
Yeah, I'd actually separate it from lead gen though, right? So I'd call it the data world, maybe, or like personal data world. It's not, I mean, I guess it is lead gen because data is collected initially. What we're really talking about is there's a world in the data industry that a lot of people know about. I've been involved in it. I've done it for years, which is effectively just the buying and selling of people's data compliantly. Some of it's questionable, but there's a huge amount of it that goes on. The people whose data it is probably have like little to no idea it's happening at all. And there's a huge amount of money made from it constantly. That's the topic.
But like you were talking about, like the specific type of it where it's not illegal what they're doing, but it's a bit questionable because they're sort of they're hiding things about what they're doing. Like, when you actually see where your data goes, realistically, a lot of the time, when I get a website now, I just instinctively click a cookie policy. I don't pay attention to it. But you were sort of saying, I know it's a weird middle ground where it's technically, is it okay? I don't even know. But they do it in a way that it's just about all right, but it's a bit questionable. It's a bit shady because they're not being open about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this falls into two categories. So there's something called co-sponsor, which is you sign up to a site and it has like a third-party marketing tick box or something, and then they'll say, if you want to hear from our partners, click this. When you click the partners, it should list a bunch of brands or company names or whatever. And so that's one element, and that's less questionable because obviously it's quite transparent to the user if they want to delve into who's going to get their data. I mean, what you could say is that, and not everyone does this, and they probably should do, is that under each of the co-sponsors, there should be an additional tick box against each of the brands so they can tick or untick many of them. What a lot of companies do is they'll just like list 50 different companies and you tick that button. And like you said, though, one of the problems could be a lot of people don't even read like stuff like that. Just tick buttons thinking that's going to be the way they're going to progress in the site. But that's almost less questionable, right? Because they do have the option not to tick it. But when they do tick it, who's in reality is going to want to hear from 40 different companies? It's just, so I'd probably limit like co-sponsor to stuff that might be relevant to the user. And then there's another type, which is basically just stuff hidden in privacy policies, right? So like you go onto a site, you fill the form in, they're using probably legitimate interest, something like that. And when you press submit, your data is shared with other companies that they think could want it. And sometimes you'll see sites that bundle that with like actually progressing into the site. So, you know, submitting a lead, or I don't know, applying for a mortgage or whatever it is. And so what will happen is they will collect the data, they'll sell it to like a bunch of their own clients who, and they could provide someone a mortgage or something. And then they'll sell it to a bunch of data resellers. They'll send it to a bunch of brokers. They'll send it to a bunch of big data houses. You know, I don't need to name them, big ones in the UK, who then effectively collect that data under their own privacy policy, which then includes a load of other brands and whatever else. And so before you know it, you've come in on one form and your data is now being dispersed to potentially hundreds of companies who are now trying to contact you. And they'll combine that with other information. So, you know, like widely available stuff, like, I don't know, the land registry or the electoral roll or anything else they can get hold of. Metadata that you might have that's coming from e-commerce sites that then can be appended where they can like match an IP or something. And yeah, once you know the scale of the problem or the size of this industry or what happens, like you will be shocked by it. I guarantee no one who, even people that know about it, I don't think they know the full scale of it. Once you start delving into the scale of it, it's huge. It's you look at it and think this can't carry on.
Well, I was going to say something really daft. I was going to say, let's say someone's listening to this show who isn't involved in this industry, and I was like, no one who's not involved in this industry will listen to this show. Like, you're not going to be casually listening to this for pleasure. Like, you're involved in some way. But let's imagine
your mum might be listening, mine might be.
Yeah, apart from sort of family members and that kind of thing. But let's say someone who's listening who isn't that kind of familiar with stuff, let's imagine, and they're aware of GDPR. Would they not think GDPR has solved this kind of issue? You know, why essentially why is it still allowed to happen with, you know, why are companies still allowed to do this?
Yeah, it's a good question. I sort of asked myself it, right? It's like, you just look at it and think, why doesn't the ICO do something about this? The thing is, when you speak to companies that are involved in this, they're usually like the ones that are the biggest experts in GDPR. So they'll always, you know, it's a bit like the law, you know, like, or an accountant where they're putting your money in the Bahamas or wherever, and people start going up in uproar and going like, why is this allowed to happen? You almost have to be an expert to be able to like get away with it, because, you know, you're just trying to find every single loophole that you possibly can in order to like extract someone's information and pass it around. But yeah, some of it's, I mean, I've seen stuff like even recently on, you know, sites that generate a fair bit of traffic where there's definitely like bundling going on, where they, you know, the sort of opt-ins become part of the submission of your data. The stuff where it's hidden in privacy policies is just really questionable for me, because they're obviously using legitimate interest. You've gone to like, I don't know, let's say a finance-based site, and it'd be like gambling, and you're suddenly like, well, how's that legitimate interest? And then you have the whole, which is used in a different way, I guess. It's just where it then gets resold, like FinTrace stuff, where it then goes off to companies that do, you know, debt collection or trying to find out credit worthiness. And I guess they might not be using it in a marketing way, but I think some of those same companies then sell that data as well, and they'll like append additional information to it. So yeah, I mean, I think that you could if you sat down, what's the woman from the ICO called, Elizabeth Denham, and said to her, you know, there's a take a look at some of this. I think she questioned a lot of it.
For sure, I'm not doing that, or is it just that it's too kind of it's too big of an issue to sort of solve quickly? You know, like this is a long, like you were saying, like there's a mass companies doing this. It's a huge thing. Like, I don't know, is it? I guess what I'm trying to say is you presented a problem here, what is the solution? Is there a solution?
Well, it's actually, it's the end buyers that cause the problem. So it's like drug dealing in reverse, I guess. Because if you're not buying it, it's not like, they're not addicts to it. It's just like a way of thinking about data, which is, I use a phrase, it's like tiddlywinks. Like people literally just think of data. So they buy it thinking like, it's like binary, it's like good or bad data. And as long as they can see a compliant opt-in somehow, which usually, by the way, isn't necessarily from the origination point of the data, it's from another reseller that's then taken hold of the data and they use like the opt-in they've got. It then becomes fair game. But yeah, it's not. I've seen, a lot of these companies involved in this sort of practices have had ICO fines, some of them. So I think it's like skirting on the edge of it constantly. But the thing is, because the ICO haven't really delved into this world in any great way, it's like it's sort of carrying on. I actually thought this would die out under GDPR. It hasn't at all.
But do you think, I don't know, I was talking to you, I know it's kind of off topic slightly, but I was talking to you about the Patagonia advert, and kind of how well that company do, because they put the sort of the brand at the center and people really buy into that these days. And I think that comes partly from people who are, are doing it, but also demanding the market, in general from consumers now, for people who have, I'd say they're becoming, as customers and consumers, we're becoming a little bit more aware of how things are done and stuff like that. So do you think that this will change because people eventually won't be satisfied with that? Do you think the companies who stop doing this will sort of go out ahead of the ones who are? Do you know what I'm sort of asking?
Yeah, I mean, there's sort of two things to this, I think. So number one, it's just not great marketing, right?
It feels lazy.
Yeah, it's just not like it's not even marketing, I wouldn't say. It's just like getting someone's data and communicating with them somehow. But you're not, all you've done to get their data is buy it for like, there's 20p or something. So it makes you wonder like how much negative brand impact it actually has. And in terms of the sort of ethics for the brands, who are the ultimate ones, because all the other companies, they're not like consumer facing brands. It's all B2B companies buying and selling data. Yeah, I mean, you only have to look at like the brands that get the sort of biggest evangelists. They wouldn't carry out these sort of exercises. And like you said, that there's knowledge of data and sort of your relationship to it as a person increases. Stuff like like we're saying, all the cookie stuff going. I mean, this is the cookie stuff's like, nothing compared to this. Like, from what we've been talking about, that how much rather would you just be like, okay, I know which website I've been on. Now you're going to serve me an ad, versus like, oh, I've got all your personal details. I'm just going to like use that to, call you, text you, email you, whatever I'm going to do with it, and it's just sat in a database somewhere or on someone's laptop, who knows what. And just had it in a CSV. It's gone through APIs everywhere. It's touched 20 different companies. I just submitted it on one.
It can't even works a lot of the time. Do you know what I mean? Like, if someone contacted me, I had no idea who they were or where they come from. Like, I wouldn't be then thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to go with you. Like, I'm going to buy something from you.
It's just spray and pray, right? It's largely what it is. Or you're looking for like interest categories on the data. So, it came from this site and they sort of said this, their salary is like, I don't know, 30 grand or something. And so you can make these assumptions about them. So yeah, they look like it could be an ideal customer. But there's no intent at all like behind the data. It's just data. So it's there's no, it is bizarre. It's especially in this world. Like I said, I've done it, right? I've bought like co-sponsor leads that we were talking about up until 2 years ago or something, a year ago. And it decreased, but like years ago, I used to buy millions of records constantly. of all this sort of stuff, just data, co-sponsor data, everything. Because you don't know any different at the time, right? Especially when you're like cutting your teeth and you're sort of learning about it. And then, like we said, co-sponsor might be potentially different anyway, because the user or the prospect does like have an actual choice. But yeah, it'll be interesting. Like, no one talks about it, or they talk about it, but I don't see anyone talking about it who really knows about it. Like, I've had this conversation.
Who's involved in that world?
Yeah, I've had this conversation with other people, like people either involved in that world, not deeply involved in the bits that we're talking about, but I've had the conversation with a few people, and everyone agrees. It's all like it's just there's too much money in it. That's all it comes down to, right? It's because it's like selling water out of a tap. It just keeps coming in. You keep selling it.
It does, but like I was saying before, to me that sounds like, I don't know, there's not that much longevity. I feel like the world's changing to a degree.
Yeah.
So,
but I thought this with
GDPR,
right? It's like when GDPR came in, it's like, okay, some of this stuff will carry on in different guises, but it won't. I think it's because co-sponsor stuff used to generally be limited to co-reg sites. You might see it elsewhere, but it used to be, and it's sort of spread now. You can see it's being done in a different way, where people are using privacy policies more and stuff like that.
Well, Steve, like I say, with co-sponsor, it is relatively transparent. Like you as a consumer, you know what you're doing. You're opting into that, and it's quite, on the whole, it should be quite visible.
The way they do it in Germany is quite good, which is double opt-in. So when you've tick that box, they then email you to say, like, are you sure? And it's not until that point that you then submit as like a co-sponsor lead. Now, what they should do in the UK is definitely have these tick boxes against each brand that then you could then, like, oh, I'll hear from that one, but not from that one. But yeah, I'd just be interested to. I don't know what the future will be. I can't imagine that it's going to be great or huge or anything. I think it's probably going down. But it's the brands that control it. It's the end buyers that control all of this. So it's actually up to them to make the decisions about, is this really how we want our marketing and sales to continue? Is this how we want to gather prospects?
I suppose there's two ways of change, isn't it? It's kind of change that consumers demanding, or like it's illegal, or the ICL, or whatever it is, they're legally enforcing this change, or consumers are demanding it, or alternatively, the more forward-thinking brands may be the ones who implement change because they realise that they don't want low-quality data, they don't want to be doing this, they don't want to be hurting their brand. They actually want to. So maybe it's a combination of the two things, like a legal aspect and things like GDPR and extensions to that, but then combined with forward-thinking brands, and maybe there'll be a sort of middle ground with those two things in the future at some point.
Yeah,
lead out into the path, but
while ever there's a demand, it will happen.
Yeah, or I mean, it's kind of depressing note to end on, but hopefully some people who might be listening who are thinking that, like you say, there are better ways to do marketing that's more creative, that's more exciting, there's more ethical.
And that's the sort of point, right? It's like, so number one, it's just because you think, why we're bombarding people with like stuff they don't want to hear about or messages they don't want. But the other is like, it's just too easy. It's this sort of bartering data around. It's not even your data. It's nothing to do with you at all. But you can just buy and sell it. And it's someone's data. When you think of that as you as a person, so imagine my data's out there and someone's just buying and selling it. You're like, the fuck are you doing with it? The sort of the way that you start thinking about it differently, that totally alters the way you think about that industry.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's wrap up there, because I feel like we've kind of topics like we tend to do, but we've kind of covered the basics of that, and usually we'll come back and explore. Maybe we'll get someone. Now, I did try and email the ICO actually and try and get them to to volunteer someone to come on, but I never got a response. So I'll try again, see if we can get someone in, talk about it from their perspective. Well, whoever's perspective who's got some input, see if you're listening and want to be involved in this kind of particular conversation, by all means get in touch with one of us on LinkedIn. But yeah, that was episode 26, the truth about data sharing. We hope you enjoyed it. Cheers. Thanks for listening to the B2C Lead Generation Podcast, the show for serious lead generators. Be sure to hit subscribe to hear more from those at the very cutting edge of the lead gen world.